Hi, my name's Michael Delaney, and in this video I'll go over my new shifting script called Rift. At the heart of Rift is its effect panel. It allows you to finitely control what elements of a layer are shifted and what elements remain in place. It allows you to do arbitrary things like just moving the out point, the markers, and the selected keyframes of a layer. To do that, I would unselect the in point, the source point. I would leave the out point and the markers selected, and then I would change the keyframe mode to selected. Then I would go down and select the layer and the keyframe that I want to move, keyframes, or what, I'll just do one keyframe right now, and then shift. And you can see that all the markers, the selected keyframe, and the out point have shifted by 1 second. The effect panel also allows you to move elements that are only found before, after, or within a range of the timeline scrubber. So for example, let's add a bunch of markers on this layer. And I only wanted to move the markers found after the timeline scrubber. To do that, I would unselect everything except the markers and uncheck before and select them, make sure the layer's selected, and then shift them by 1 second. Now, everything after the timeline scrubber, all the markers after the timeline scrubber have been moved by 1 second, and the ones before haven't. And to show how this works with a range, I'll undo that, and then I'll just copy and paste a bunch more keyframes here. Yeah. So now, say I only wanted to affect markers and keyframes that are after the timeline scrubber and within a range. So I'll select all keyframes, check off markers, leave it checked off, turn on range, and let's say I only want to do elements that are found within five frames instead of a second. So I'll put in 5F, and that will now convert to 5 frames, not the default unit of seconds, because we're overriding it right here. And now I'll run this, and I'll push them a little bit farther down the timeline. So now you can see that only this marker right here and these 2 keyframes, because they're after that timeline scrubber, and all these elements are within 5 frames of it, have moved 3 seconds over there. Everything else has stayed the same. So say I wanted to move that other keyframe, I would just push the scrubber just 1 frame over, then that keyframe would qualify as after, and then I'll run it again. And so now all those things have moved. And this flip negative in out points option, that's for correcting behavior with negatively stretched layers. So I'll just negatively stretch this layer 100% or whatever. And then I'll reset this before, after, and range option so we can be sure that it's selecting everything. And then let's just say I wanted to move the endpoint, or what you may think is the endpoint, over by 1 second. So, and I'll turn this off to show you what happens. So if I were to shift this right now by 1 second, it's going to move the out point and not the endpoint, because that is actually what it is. This is the endpoint, and then this is the out point. So you will most likely always want to keep this on, because this, well, at least to me, this seems like this needs to be the endpoint, and then this needs to be the out point. So now when I run this, it correctly applied it to the perceived endpoint. One really quick little thing about this shift panel is the equal sign button, and that will let you absolutely set the position in the timeline of an element. So say we wanted to move the endpoints of all these layers to 1 second. So we would uncheck everything but the endpoint and set that to 1 second, and then press the equal sign button, and that will shift the endpoints to 1 second. The state panel helps you save current settings for later use. So say we wanted to keep this current option that we have right now of moving just the endpoint over by 1 second, and we want to do something completely different. So let's jump over to another state, and everything will reset to its default because we haven't done anything in this state yet. And let's say we only wanted to move the out point of these layers backwards by 1 second. And I just clicked on this exclamation point, and that inverts whatever value you currently have in here. So that's just a little convenience function. And then you can see that it just moves the out points back by 1 second each. So now this is actually all been automatically saved into state number 2. And if we were to jump back over to state 1, you can see that it's back to the endpoint in the 1 second shift, and we can jump back and forth, and you can see what's changing between each state. So it's just a way to save all the settings into different reusable states. Sequencing is arranging layers within a set duration. So say we wanted to linearly ascend all these layers between 0 and 2. So to do that, we'd select all the layers, and then we'd go over to the sequence panel, set 2 seconds as the duration, and we're in seconds as the default unit, and we'd go ascending and then run this. So now from 0 to 2, all these layers have been arranged. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. You can do descending, of course, and now one of the more useful features is being able to applying an ease on this. So we want to have an in ease. We just switch it from linear to in and run this, and so now all these layers have been with over 2 seconds. They've been applied with a in ease, and this expo input field is the strength of this ease. So a 2 would actually show some curve, whereas a 1 would just be a linear effect. So let's put 2 back in there, or maybe 1.5, just a little bit less strong. 1.1, you can barely see it, what it's doing, so it's not really useful there, but we could apply a really strong expo amount like 8. You can see what happens. I'm sure there'll be some use for that in the After Effects world. So you can do that with in, you can do that with out. We'll set that back to a sane expo amount. We'll do 2, and so you can see it's now going out. You can also do both, which is in and out ease, and you can see that. And you can revert that and do ascending. And you can also do selected order. So right now it's actually, without this being selected, it's doing this in the order of what the timeline has actually arranged this automatically. But say you wanted to control which layers are actually being operated on in order. So we'll select these individually, and now we'll run this, and you can see it doesn't make any sense, but that's actually doing it in the layer that I selected those. You can kind of make out what it's doing. But I'm sure there's somebody out there that will probably love that, so that's why it's there. And so that's sequencing. Staggering does what it says. It staggers each layer by a specific offset. And to demonstrate this, I'll select all these layers. I'll show off another function of these smart input fields, and I'll offset each one of these by 10 milliseconds. So you just put in millisecond, or ms for milliseconds, and now let's do ascending order. Each one of these will be offset by 10 milliseconds each. So that's it. Randomize is also pretty straightforward. To demonstrate, I'll randomize the endpoint of each one of these layers. So I'll unselect everything else and go down to the random panel, and let's say I only wanted to do this by half a second. So put in 0.5 there, and then I'll click go. So in only a positive direction, because we didn't have a negative min value in there, we only had a positive max value. So within half a second of the original endpoint value, these endpoint values have been randomized. We can put a negative minimum value in too, and now it'll go either way of its original value. Rift was intended to work in conjunction with my layer sorting script called Sortie. To show this off, I'll show you what would happen if I were to stagger all these layers in ascending order right now. And this may be what you want. If so, great. But say I wanted to have all these graphic elements come on from left screen to right screen. So based on their position, their X position, going from left to right. And I wanted the ones with lower X position values to come on first and the ones with higher X position values to come on last. So we can use Sorty to sort all these layers to do that. So I'll jump over to Sorty, I'll make sure we're in position mode, and then X-axis, and then ascending order matches the ascending order on the stagger, and we'll run this. And can't see anything yet, but these were all in order before, and now they're all seemingly out of order. But if we go back over to Rift and stagger these, and I run this, you can see that they're building on from left to right. So that's how you can use Rift and Sorty together. And this was a pretty simple demonstration of that too. There's a lot more complicated things you can do with it. One caveat of the script that I must tell you about is that it's not particularly fast when you're doing anything other than the default move everything of a layer at the same time, especially with a bunch of keyframes like in this composition. So right now this is going to go pretty quickly and I can do each one of these operations really fast. But now if I go to just selected, so now it's only going to move these keyframes that I have selected, you're going to notice a significant delay because of the way that Adobe currently has us moving keyframes along the timeline. There's no native function to do that. You have to basically copy the keyframe, delete the keyframe, and then recreate the keyframe at the new time. And that's a very slow process, especially in JavaScript. So if you want this to be faster, I'd ask you to go to Adobe's suggestion form and request for them to add a fast native move key function. And that would help resolve this problem because it's pretty slow right now working with a lot of keyframes. And that's Rift. I hope you can find a useful place for it in your workflow. Thanks.